Hey, it's your girl Rajette Speaks here with Narrative Shifts, and I've got an amazing guest named Bobby Moore who is in the house. We're gonna wait on people, of course, but you can say hey and wave to the zero folks that are here right now.
Hey, everybody.
We'll just wait for a little bit. Just a little banter, I guess. How was your day? How are things going in your neck of the woods?
I can't complain. I'm in Seattle, as you know,
Hmm.
which is not the sunniest place on earth. So, dealing with the weather and quarantine and all of that. But
Hmm.
yeah, good. I can't complain.
Okay, good. Is it a pretty is it a mild climate in terms of temperature right now, or like what does that look like in Seattle?
So Seattle is it's interesting because this everything is between 40 and 80. So it doesn't
Hmm.
hardly ever get colder than 40, and it never gets much warmer than 80. But if you're ever outside of 40 to 80, all hell breaks loose.
Is that right?
If it snows, people are like, I don't know what I'm doing. If it's too hot, people are complaining like it's too
Okay.
hot.
Hmm.
So yeah, Seattle just stays in that, like, it's ultra moderate in all senses of the word.
Okay.
And but it's good though, because it's really, I mean, I think Seattle gets a bad rep in terms of weather. It's
Mhm.
really gorgeous out here. And when it's sunny, like, there are very few places I would rather be. So I
Wow.
mean, mountains and it's lakes, and so it's really scenic. But yeah, you got to deal with a little bit of rain. Stuff
Okay.
looks green without having rain. So that's kind of the trade off we get.
Love that. I know it appears to be pretty cloudy in most of the pictures that I see, or that's sort of the what everyone talks about is how cloudy it is. That there's not much sun. So like in a typical year on average, and I mean I'm sure we could look this up, but in a typical year, how often is it sunny?
It's sunny end of June through September.
Okay. Well, that sounds like Michigan. Some.
And then it's raining. Well, the difference for me is, like, when we were in school, for example, when we were in Ann Arbor,
Yeah.
like, it would be snowing, but it would be ultra sunny, right?
True.
Like, so a lot of sun, it's just snow.
True.
Here, it's like it actually really doesn't actually rain that much
Okay.
in terms of, like, just pure amount of water that you get. Like, it's not like pouring all the time. It's just
Hmm.
drizzling all the time. So it's just really overcast. So if you have
Gotcha.
an issue where you need sun in order, like, if that affects your mood, for example, which it never has, like, I don't really have this problem as much. But if
Okay.
you do, you got to travel, right? Like,
Hmm.
because it can be overcast for months at a time, right?
Yeah.
Like, and you'll see the sun if you are up, particularly if you're working, right? Like, so if you're up early, it might be sunny, and then it might be sunny some point during the day. But a lot of people are indoors, right? Like, in the
Gotcha.
office or doing whatever. And so, like, you just don't see the sun, or you'll miss it, right? Like, it might be sunny for a second, you might miss it. So I think, for me, I've always thought every so often, just hop on a plane, go south, Southern California. It never rains, apparently.
Right.
It's
That's what
sunny,
they
get some
say.
sun there, go to Vegas, get some sun.
Yes.
But yeah, here in the summers it's gorgeous.
Okay. I gotta get out there. I know everybody has told me this, and I just haven't made my way. So maybe next year, maybe when all the COVID restrictions are lifted and things are in a new normal with a semblance of some ability to travel, move around a little less cautiously, then I think I'll make that trip.
I'll hold you to that.
Yeah. All right. All right. I'm there for it. All right. So we've got one person on, and we will speak to that one person. So again, it's your girl Rajette Speaks with Narrative Shifts. This is where we are redefining and reframing the narratives that go out about us. And today I've got wonderful guests with me. Bobby Moore from Detroit has been living in Washington for some time, and he'll tell you a little bit more about himself in a moment. Welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us, Bobby.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, appreciate it. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yep. So, like you said, born and raised in Detroit. Uh, I don't think, like, I never left Detroit really. So my entire childhood was in Detroit. I mean, I think really in terms of traveling, I have family in Chicago,
Mm.
family in Texas, family in Mississippi, and that was my, kind of childhood travel, like Florida, maybe
Mhm.
a little bit of Canada. but that was about it. So I graduated from Detroit Renaissance High School, Phoenix, go Phoenix. Went to University of Michigan, go Blue. Did the 5-year plan there in engineering. My degree was in computer engineering. Came out, got recruited to Microsoft my junior year. So I interned my junior year there, interned my senior year, went out full time. Thought I was going to go back to grad school. Decided I didn't really want to go back to grad school, and been in Seattle ever since. So I've been in Seattle for about 22 years now, roughly, and done a lot. Still at Microsoft, so I've been at Microsoft all that time. Done a number of different jobs here. Like I said, my degree was in engineering, but I also have done marketing, sales enablement roles, back in engineering, speech writing, just done a lot of different things here at the company. Had a lot of fun. And so, yeah, that's where I am today. I have a wife. We've been married for 13 years. Well, I guess for 14 years now. And 2 sons, a 16-year-old son, 5-year-old son. So a lot of space in between those. But yeah, I'm blessed. We're healthy.
Yeah.
And life is good.
I love that. Thank you. I mean, that was such an abbreviated version. I don't know that I could have done it so succinctly. But obviously we met at U of M. It had to be maybe my junior year or going into my junior year, I think. Just as much as I was spending time on North Campus and that kind of thing. It's funny because, you and I were joking a little bit. Everyone always thought I was an engineer because the majority of my friends are engineers, at least college friends were engineers. And to be honest, I had so much fun on y'all's campus. Like North Campus was everything, and so I would get up there and just have a good time. So Bobby and I met there. Really because he was in leadership roles and in a kind of mentoring capacity. It seemed he was just kind of big brother Bobby, but super professional and someone we all looked up to. And so even with my literature, science, and arts backdrop, it was definitely cool to see, young Black men and women in these positions of leadership in the engineering school, which I thought was just so profound. So I'm glad that you're here. It's been a while.
Yes. I will just say 2 things. One, it wasn't until yesterday that I found out that you weren't in engineering. So that is like 20-year-old news.
Right? So when I said that was the first that you knew that? Wow.
I was like, yeah, when I would describe you, I was like, yeah, Jet, remember? She's in engineering and she was a hooper. So that's the second thing that people might not know about you.
Right.
Jet was a hooper.
It was
yeah, so that was the other intersection. But that's interesting. So I never knew that. I thought you were in engineering. And so from my perspective, like I'm not going to change that impression of you. You are in engineering. So we're rolling with that.
We can roll with it. I'm good with it. Okay, so I just wanted to connect. Obviously, you're part of our 5-part series on Black men and mental health, and we've had some really substantial and good conversations surrounding this lately. I think it was the summertime when I created kind of a poll on my Facebook page, and you chimed in when I had asked, if anybody saw the value in it and kind of asked some specific questions. And so I just want to hear a little bit about kind of your thoughts on mental health awareness or just even kind of what you have gone through, obviously, personally, but what your thoughts and ideals are around mental health as we know it clinically.
Okay. Yeah. So, as we talked about, we had this conversation. For me, I didn't have a concept of therapy growing up. So grew up in Detroit. Detroit's all Black. So all the people, all my friends, all of my, the adults around, everyone I knew was Black. And I think growing up, the way that I was internalized how you deal with things is you don't have your business in the street, right? Like, so you take care of internal problems internally. And so like, I didn't, and I won't even say it was really a, ultra negative thing or had like much of a stigma, at least at that point when I was younger. It just wasn't a thing, right? Like I didn't hear anybody saying like, oh, I'm going to therapy for X, Y, or Z. I just didn't hear about it at all. So really the idea of even having those types of interactions was introduced to me more from a professional perspective.
Hmm.
So when I got to Michigan, so I guess maybe when I got to Microsoft, the idea of coaching and mentorship and things of that nature, which I would say is kind of less clinical,
Mhm.
but to me more in the same direction. That was all introduced to me at Microsoft, where particularly as an African American coming to Microsoft at the time when I came in, which diversity was a big initiative at that point, which again would have been 20 years ago.
Mhm.
There was always this idea of, okay, if we're going to recruit talent to Microsoft, Black talent, and we're going to keep them, we better make sure that they have a community
Mhm.
and coaching, right? Like, because if you don't, like, then you'll have, you can recruit, but you can't retain. And
Mhm.
so there was this idea of retaining, and part of that was you need to have mentorship and coaching. And so then the idea of coaching to me was more like a professional area. And
Okay.
it resonated because, back when I was in Michigan, that was what we did for each other, right? Like we would coach each other, we would mentor each other. We'd have groups of people that would kind of engage and, just help make sure that we were on top of our stuff from a academic perspective, and that, we weren't losing our own identity up in Michigan, which is, a lot of Black people there at the time, but
Mhm.
still majority white school.
Right.
So that, I won't say that it was not formally introduced to me at Michigan, but that was kind of what was happening at an academic level.
Sure.
Then at Microsoft, it was introduced to me um, formulaically as a professional development skill.
Hmm.
Then later on in life, for me, it was like, well, once you've had people tell you from a professional development perspective, this is how people get ahead, right? Like they figure out what they're good at, they figure out what they're not good at, what
Hmm.
challenges they have, and then they get coaching for it, right? Then the mental transition from that to, okay, in my personal life, I need to figure out what I'm good at, what things I'm not good at, and I need to get help for the things that I'm not good at. Then that transition was a little more smooth. So then later in my life, like this idea of getting therapy and counseling and things of that nature, it just kind of made sense logically, right? Like for me, I've always thought I should be a better person each day than I was the day prior, right?
Hmm.
Each day, each month, each year. And you can't get better if you don't have people help. Like the analogy I use is, so my son is 16 and
Okay.
he's really into basketball, or at least he was. He's still very into basketball, not as much as he was, but maybe even a year or two ago, it was like, okay, what type of help are you getting? What's your
Hmm.
skills? Are you doing skills development? Who are you working with? Right? Like what trainer is working with you? And as you start to meet more and more people, you realize like these high level athletes, they're not going into their job trying to figure out how to get better without having coaches and trainers and things of that nature.
Hmm.
Well, so if it's good for athletics, right? Like, and these, all these people we admire, right? Like the LeBrons and the Kobe's and the rest in peace and Jordans, like they all
Hmm.
have trainers and things that are helping them. Like, why wouldn't you do that for yourself in other areas of life? And then particularly for me, from a personal perspective, that was the way that I would rationalize and say, like, look, if I need help with something, then, I'm not going to avoid getting help from people outside of my household who have experience and can, give me the guidance that I need.
I think that's an amazing answer. I'm thinking about our time at U of M, and so you did sort of, wrap that up really nicely in terms of the fact that we did offer coaching. We did a lot of peer-to-peer coaching. We did a lot of we had just a lot of wonderful examples of those who were coaching us, that we got to spend some real intimate time with and really learn the process of mentee, mentor, someone who's going to be teaching. And it being a lifestyle type of deal, right? Not just we graduate, we had some, mentors, and then we were on to the next. It kind of, I believe, it built something in us in terms of us continuing to seek out, okay, if we want to be like this, or we want to have this type of success, or whatever the case may be, maybe it's a matter of somebody that needs to quit smoking. Okay, if I want to quit smoking, what does that look
Right.
like? It's finding people, aligning yourself with people who have already done those things or who've been able to, like get out of a situation. Um,
Correct.
so I love that was kind of just, it seemed to be groomed in you in a lot of ways, pretty early, which I would say is quite the anomaly, um,
Correct.
in our community and just really young people, I think, like across the board, to be honest. So thank you for sharing that. Do you find that it was reinforced? So you spoke about this personal side of things. You find that it was reinforced other ways aside from you having this awareness of, this works over here in my academic and professional life. How can I apply this to my personal life? Do you feel like there were other areas even where you were able, hey,
Real visitor.
it's fine. Do you find that there were other areas that you saw that come up, or you had the opportunity to participate in sort of these intimate, sort of small group situations, or one on one with someone?
Yeah. So outside of the stuff that we talked about from a professional development perspective, then so for me, the way I got into formal, what I would call formal counseling, effectively therapy, was really down two paths. One, well, let me see, because they both are actually really related. So we had a couple, my wife and I had a couple that we really, really admired, or we really admire today. We were actually really good friends with them.
Mm-hmm.
And they're a little older than us, but they had really been sharing with us just about their experience from a marriage perspective. So it really kind of started around this idea of marriage and parenting, because they also have kids that are the same age as my oldest.
Hmm.
And so their feedback was like, look, we have these issues with, our relationship as a couple, these issues with being a parent to kids, these issues with, like the world around us. And that put us in two directions. Number one, from a marriage perspective, they were saying like, look, we get counseling for these things. And so we were like, well, if it's good for them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like we have a lot of admiration for them. If it's good for them, then it's good for us. So that was one of the first steps, was marriage counseling for my wife and I, which broke out into personal counseling for me, which I'll talk a little bit about.
Okay.
And then the second stage of that was that same couple. We started going to church with them. And so then from a spiritual perspective, one of the doctrines of the church is how you come together as a small group, you support each other, you hold each other accountable. And so then that also translated into some other experiences that were, like small group areas where we're coaching each other and again, holding each other accountable. And then men's groups that kind of the same thing, where we're holding each other accountable and counseling and helping each other. So I would say a lot of that was from, and it wasn't just this particular couple. It was a couple other couples that we had around us that we really respected. They all were kind of saying the same things. This couple in particular were really kind of giving us that guidance of, okay, like, here's how we handled our issues. If you're having something similar, then you need to, go off and do that. And then the church structure with the small groups really reinforced that.
That's awesome. I think the small group structure in church, not, and I know all of our listeners are not necessarily are like church attenders, right? But that small group dynamic, I know my first exposure to it that really opened me up to therapy, in the clinical sense, actually came from that. So I did not grow up in the church. A lot of people know that side of me. Like I wasn't raised in the church. It wasn't until really, gosh, I had to be maybe like 28, 29, right in there when I started going to a particular church in California. That was where I saw the difference even culturally, right? And so predominantly Black church, that I was affiliated with when I was here, Pentecostal backdrop, like there wasn't much said in the way of counseling, right? And certainly not, back then, right? And then you fast forward, and I'm at a church that actually my pastors were white, but it was a very diverse pastoral staff. So like I had, I believe a Ugandan pastor, a Polynesian pastor, it was like across the board. We had some wonderful diversity. And I think for me, when I started realizing that there were tons of people who had this small group experience that I had heard nothing about until then. All I knew was kind of like, okay, people go to Bible study, people might go to one, like an AA group or something like that. But in terms of everyday life type stuff, like
Right.
finances or
Right.
maybe somebody's grieving, like the grief group, all these different groups. And when I started seeing that, I was like, wow, there must be something to this. My first experience with it was I was like, y'all just out here opening, y'all just telling all your business to everybody. And so it was so foreign and strange, the concept, right? But after I started seeing people's lives get changed truly, and then, myself having the opportunity to, share with someone and seeing them be moved and get something from that and vice versa. That's when I was really sold on the idea of, even just small groups for even behavioral health, right? It's like
Yep.
or like for you guys, like it's just you guys, like the fellas get together, that's a small group,
Right.
and being
No,
able
you
to
took me because I remember, we used to, or we still do, but I guess now maybe I'm on the other side of it, where you do have these small groups and people are just sharing, right? Like sharing their struggles, their issues. And that for me was maybe the most foreign part of it, which is maybe even a little more foreign than if I get in front of somebody in a one-on-one situation, then it's like, okay, nobody's around. I'm just going to talk to you. But then when there's a group of people and you're like, that might be too much information.
right,
Like,
right.
I
Exactly.
used to like all of this personal stuff being shared, but
Right.
then what you find is that one, people have the same problems, right? Like, or maybe let me say that different, because people don't have the same problems, but you don't necessarily have a problem that's unique to you, right?
Correct.
Like, it's maybe the best way to put it.
That's good.
Something that someone's going to share is something that you relate to, or something that you share is something that someone else has either the same struggle with, or the same, issue, or the same experience. And that makes you feel like you're not alone. And I think that for me was one of the things that I really embraced about that type of environment, where you're sharing with other people, is that, you're not alone. And then these people, someone else in some case may be able to say something that is encouraging to you, or sparks an idea for something that you can do to make yourself better. So I feel like, one of the things that, particularly as Black people, right, like, we just don't share what we're going through this is a stereotype, so I should not stereotype this, but I would say I unfortunately did not have a lot of experiences where Black people were sharing things with each other in a productive way, right? Like, it's not that you don't know what's going on in so-and-so's, life, because somehow their mess is getting out, but it's
Right.
not productive, right? Like, it's shared by way of gossip, or by way of, after the fact, after some horrible has happened or terrible has happened, then it's shared as like tragic news. But, ensuring that ahead of the curve, you're sharing these things in a productive way around people that have experience and have education around ways they can help you. Like, I think that's one of the things that it's been helpful for me, and I think we could, as a community, do better.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely correct with that. We have had such a stigma or some type of barrier, as it pertains to what we should share, what we shouldn't, what we need to keep close, what's family business, and that being so contextual in terms of our cultural backdrop, just history. And so I think what I like right now, and I've shared this I think on a previous episode, um, how I'm seeing even in the school systems right now with social emotional learning, right? They're getting the opportunities to actually share as well, in like a small group in what we call restorative circles in the classroom, where they can have these, real kind of bold expressions, not be judged, understand it's a safe space, and all these norms are communicated, with these techniques. And I love that our young people right now are getting that opportunity, because it's breaking down what has become the norm of not sharing and not being healed, and in turn oftentimes having health challenges as a result, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that whole connection there. So I do appreciate you sharing that aspect. Definitely had a few more questions,
Mhm.
so let's see, where was
Yeah, I think the it's key. I love to hear, because I'm not as familiar with this. I love to hear that it's being introduced in schools,
Mhm,
because I think that just accelerates the growth. Like I can imagine for me,
mhm,
like if I was where I am now as a young person, like how much further I'd be along today than I am now, right? Like I've
mhm,
been on this journey. Like this is a Bobby's in his 30s journey, not Bobby's in his teens, right? Like,
right.
um, and so I feel like hopefully they're getting accelerated learning from starting early.
Mhm,
Um, because I will say, like kids now don't have it easier than we have it as it
mm-mm,
relates to many things. I think that's another myth, is that things are a lot easier. Like
mhm,
things are more accessible. Things are like there's way more exposure for a lot of things than even what I had. And I felt like I had pretty early exposure to a lot of things.
sure.
But it's nothing like what I'm seeing with kids today, like across the board, right? Like of things that if not handled properly can degrade your ability to develop in the way you want to develop, whether it's introduction to sexual materials and sexuality in a way that maybe kids aren't necessarily don't have the tools to deal with,
Mhm,
introduction to drugs in a way that kids don't have tools to deal with. Like
mhm,
all of that is happening. I talk to, you know, um, kids in our church that I mentor.
mhm.
The stuff they're telling me, I'm like, I wasn't exposed to that stuff until college, right? Like
Wow.
maybe after college. And these are like, 15, 16, 17-year-old kids. And so, yeah, I do think I'm glad the kids are getting that experience earlier, because, the stuff that the exposure is happening earlier.
That's true. Yeah, yeah, social emotional learning has become I'm sorry, I'm hearing feedback a little bit. Okay. Social emotional learning has become such a big, I guess, phrase. It's almost trendy now, right? But
Yeah,
it's important, and there are a lot of schools and districts who are definitely spending time to make that a priority. And so, my school in particular, we have a SEL period, right, where we actually talk about, some of these. Like just the other day, what was ours, we were talking about respect, right, and just kind of going through what it means to be respected. What is your definition of respect? We talk about having mindfulness for kids, just take a moment, and just kind of
right.
breathe through it, take a moment and practice gratitude. So yes, it is definitely something that's very much in the forefront, I believe, in a lot of districts, at least around here. So
Yeah,
I'm sure it's pretty much nationwide, but it definitely is something that's happening in the Detroit area, which is great.
good.
Um, so I wanted to know how would you encourage someone who might be on the fence about either attending therapy or a small group? If you wanted to share anything else, I know you mentioned that you had some kind of what led you to the personal counseling. If you wanted to get into that at any point, you can share that as well. But definitely want to know how you would encourage someone to go.
Yeah, okay. Let me answer the first part, the
Hmm.
second part first, which is so when my wife and I went through marriage counseling, one of the things that, or as we go through marriage counseling, because to me it's a lifelong journey. One of the things that became obvious to me
Hmm.
is like I don't, I didn't necessarily always have the best um, way of internalizing interactions with women, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? Like, so, which to me affects like all aspects of my life, right? Like professionally, personally, my marriage. Um, for example, one of the things that I know a lot of men struggle with, this is a struggle for me, is like how you objectify women, right? Like, so you see a woman and immediately like you place her in a category of how they look, what other characteristics they have that don't have anything to do with the way that you're relating to them
Mm.
from a personal perspective. Um, and so I had a couple of friends that had daughters. And I think if you have a daughter and you're a man, I think you start to maybe get a little bit of insight into what that means.
Mm.
But I've had sons. And so I still am like a little bit abstracted from that.
Sure.
But just this idea of like, okay, I'm trying to have a productive relationship with my wife, and then I'm just objectifying every woman around me immediately, even sometimes subconsciously.
Sure.
When that was brought to my attention and the impact that it has on the other interactions that I have, like, it was kind of interesting to me, that some of the downsides of having that as a trait, and this, fairly normal amongst men,
Mhm.
and what it means to really dig into that and understand what it means, and then start to walk some of that back. So for me, that was part of it. That was a big part of it. In addition to the way that I communicate in general with people around me, understanding myself. I'm particularly introverted,
Mhm.
not like dysfunctionally, but I am heavily introverted. So like what that means for the way that I interact with other people, and how, and the rules and the tips and tricks for how I should be interacting with people, and kind of being aware of my own energy level as it relates to being introverted. Like
Mhm.
those are all things that I've learned over time that has been like priceless for me in a lot of different situations.
Sure.
So then going back to your first question, the way that I would try and encourage people who really are on the fence, um, for me, I think you are in one of two camps. You either don't think you have a problem at all,
Mhm.
in which case I think, live your life, right? Like if you don't have any issues, live your life, right? Like I personally think anyone who thinks that, and particularly if they're black, they probably are fooling themselves. Like I can tell you, if you're black in America, you've experienced some level of, trauma, right? Innate trauma, right? Like, so there's probably something going on. But like if you don't feel that, then that would not be the person that I would start with and trying to say like, oh yeah, you need counseling, right? Or you need therapy or these other things. But if you sense you have a problem, or something that you feel like you want to improve about yourself, then what I would say is, again, I go back to that athlete analogy. Like there's nothing that you're going to be able to do to improve yourself that doesn't involve getting coaching from someone else or getting help from someone else, that is really going to be the optimized way of doing it.
Mhm.
So you can read books, and you can try and self counsel, um, and maybe it works, but it definitely won't be fast, right? Like it's not the optimized path for doing it. So I would just say, like, try it, right? Like try it. If you don't like it, then keep it pushing. But for me, and for what I've seen now, and for what I recognize to be a model for success, you got to have that outside help. You got to be able to communicate with people that have education and have more experiences than you do, and let them help you, right? Like, and then I would also say, um, a lot of it too. There's a certain comfort level. There's a certain vulnerability that you have to have, and that's the tough part.
Mhm.
There's also a comfort level that you have to find with the person who's counseling you or giving you therapy or whatever that dynamic is. So you want to be, you do have to give some thought to how you go about it, in order to achieve maximum results. But I would just say, like, try it, give a little bit of thought to it, try it, and that, for my money, is the effective way to go about these things.
Nice. Thank you for sharing that. One of the things that's so interesting, and I love that you're bringing to the table the coaching dynamic, the mentoring dynamic, because there are some barriers that we've talked about in the previous shows. Obviously, one of those barriers being financial for some of the people who might be watching, right?
Yep.
Um, Other barriers are what you said, where it's someone that's like, I don't have a problem. I don't need any help, so that's its own barrier, right?
Right.
Eventually they'll come to, have come to Jesus moment or whatever, so that they can get what they need. But I love that you're bringing in another dynamic here, in terms of the coaching and the mentoring and personal counseling that may not have been necessarily in the vein of clinical or cognitive type counseling. um, it speaks to the fact that you still need help, sometimes we go through life and we feel like we got this. We can just do what we need to do, focus here without any help. Um, and we've talked in previous episodes, and most of us know that we need somebody in this world, right?
Right.
And two is better than one, in my opinion. And so, when it comes down to just asking for help, sometimes that's difficult for people. A lot of times we find that people hit this proverbial rock bottom, right?
Yep.
Before they end up reaching out. And sometimes, it's so many times, we don't have to hit that space. We don't
Right.
have to be that far down. We can be proactive or slightly even reactive, slightly
Yeah.
reactive, so that we can make these decisions ahead of time, so that we're not, in this huge bind, really trying to figure out how we got here, right?
Right. Right.
And so I love that you're speaking to that side as well. So for someone who kind of is in that camp, let's say they haven't been someone working for Microsoft for 20 something years, but they're working every day, maybe a couple of different jobs. What would you recommend if they can't get counseling, if they can't really get in there? Maybe they can't afford it, maybe it's a time thing. What do you recommend, just from black male to black male, black parent, black kid? What do you recommend in terms of trying to have a healthy mental health aspect?
Yeah, I think for me, where it started and what I'll say, in general, is get a sense for, like, let's say that all other things are off the table, right? Like, in just the basics. Who do you admire, right? Like, who do you look up to in the world, right? Like, and you say, like, this person has their stuff taken care of. Or you see this person, man, they had this issue, and now they're at a different point where it seems like they don't have this issue anymore, or they don't have this issue as much as they had it, right? Like, and go talk to those people, right? Like, that for me is probably one of the main things that you can do if you just don't have anything else going. Just ask someone, like, what have you done to achieve this level of success or evolution or whatever it is that you see about them, and then try and take tips and tricks from what they're doing. Because what I think you'll find is that person has gone to see someone, like,
Right.
and then that person is basically going to say, well, here's the things that I did. And then you'll basically begin the third party, which is maybe not as, again, maybe it's not optimized as if you were going directly to the source of the education, but at least it's something, right? Like, it's something that's better than nothing. So whatever the issue is, if you think you have identified something as somebody that is advanced to where you see yourself, then go out and ask that person, right? Like, you hear so many success stories across the board. Like, you hear about somebody who, like, all of the people, not all the people, but you hear so many success stories about people who are financially independent, as an example. And they're like, yeah, I used to be in lows of debt and blah, 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 blah. And now I'm financially independent. And then, like, you're like, okay, so how did you do that? And the first story they'll say is, well, I knew this person, and this person was doing blah, 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 blah. And then, so I started doing it, right? Like, it works, right? Like, imitating success to get to be successful, it actually works, right? Like, there's a reason why that exists as a social construct, right? Is because it actually does work. And so that's where I would start, right? Like, if you just didn't have any other wherewithal, I would just start and finding somebody that is where you want them to be, and then figuring out how they got there.
Okay. And so, not just even in the terms of success, but or what we would maybe define success, right, in the Western context. But, if this is somebody, got healed from something, or someone used to smoke and they're not, you don't want to be a smoker anymore, or something to that effect. It's like,
I would say, like, so if you, for example, if you have anger issues, right? And you've seen somebody out there that used to have anger issues, and now you notice they don't have it anymore. That person did something, right? Like, they just didn't wake up one day less angry. So something happened, right? Like, to make that happen. So go ask that person what they did. If you feel like you have a problem with like just pick any vice, right? Like alcohol, pornography. Pornography is probably a tougher one because most people aren't really suggesting that they have an issue with that. But alcohol, cigarettes, etc. Find somebody that had that issue and is now better off than they were, and they'll tell you what they did, right? Like my experience is most people that have had success getting. And when I say success, I don't mean like in the, to your point, like the
Mhm.
Western definition of I'm rich and,
Mhm.
blah, 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 blah. I mean, I had a goal and I achieved that goal, right? Like, so if your goal is you smoke, you want to stop smoking, go
Mhm.
talk to somebody who's used to smoke and they're not smoking anymore, right? Like, if you find that you drink too much and you don't want to drink as much, go find somebody that, used to drink a lot and doesn't drink as much anymore.
Mhm.
If you don't have the marriage that you want to have, go find somebody that didn't have the marriage, that was great and now they do, right? Like if you want to raise, successful children in whatever the definition of that is, just find somebody that's doing it, ask them. And
Mhm.
most people won't have an issue sharing their story and sharing their tips and tricks. Like no one's trying to hoard information that I know. Uh,
Right.
and so again, if you don't have any other wherewithal, like try and find somebody that you've seen be successful, and that will help put you on the path. That's been my experience.
That's fantastic advice for sure. I do have a question. I know that you probably have a pretty full life, right? You have all these components to your life. I kind of stay away from the term busy. I hate that word actually, but so you have a pretty full life. Um, and you actually come across as a very balanced person. So you've definitely been working on a lot of different things. I can hear that, just based off of the couple conversations that we've had lately. I want to know, how does Bobby maintain the calm? How does Bobby maintain the peace? With all the things that are going on, being a black man in America, working for a company like Microsoft, obviously managing your household, being married with children, and all the familial responsibilities. Um, how do you get to a place of calm in a day? Do you have a routine that you follow? Do you, in terms of self care, what does that look like for you?
That's a great question. I don't think I'm great at this. I think I can get better.
Okay.
This is the area where I'm going to be searching help, I think. But I will say, for me, a couple of things. One, I I have found when I'm better off, it's because I have given a lot of forethought to my week, right? Like to my week, maybe even, to my month, but definitely to my week,
Okay.
right? Like I've just tried to stare at it for a minute and be like, okay, I got to accomplish these things. You know, I'm going to have these kind of rough hours or these rough days in this week and just kind of mentally prepare myself beforehand.
Mm.
And I think that helps a lot, right? Like, because I don't feel like then every situation is not something that's just bombarding me, right? Like that I didn't see coming. A lot of it for me is setting myself up mentally, right? Like to be prepared for a tough conversation, a tough interaction,
Mm.
or a heavy, high volume day, or a lot of context switching where it's like, okay, I'm working now, but then I have to deal with the kids and then I have to do this, then I have to do this. So for me, a lot of it is like just setting that mental preparation up front. And then, of course, things are going to come that I don't expect, right?
Mm.
Like, but at least the things that I can control, I'm doing my best to control it. And then that also means that I am also setting apart time for me proactively
Mhm.
to be mentally healthy, right? Like time to meditate or time to work out or time to, spend time, downloading with my wife or spend time talking to friends or, like, so I can kind of fit that into my schedule.
Mhm.
And then like the other thing for me is I try to be, and everyone doesn't have this. This is a privilege that I have that I don't think everyone has, but I
Okay.
think people have it maybe a little bit more than they think they do, which is the ability to really say no to certain things, right?
Mm.
Like be thoughtful about So I'll go through a week, and if I know it's a really busy week, then I'll immediately just start saying like, okay, these are the things I'm not going to do, right?
Mm.
Like this is going to be a work week. I'm not going to do all of these things that I would normally do from a family perspective. Or this is going to be a family week. I'm not going to do all these things that I think that I had planned to do or that I would normally do from a work perspective. And really just kind of just being as hardcore about that as you can, because to a certain degree, you have to be your own Calvary, is
Mm.
it for some of these things, right? Like like, and again, like I said, I'm more privileged, I think, in this respect, but I think people have a little bit more freedom than they give themselves credit for,
Okay.
and say no, right? Like, no, I can't do this. I
Mm-hmm.
can't do that, right? Like, or I'm not going to do it now, or maybe not necessarily no, but later, right? Like, I'm not going to do this at this particular moment. I'm going to do it here when it actually fits into my schedule, and not be so much a slave to the things that are happening around us. I think that's helpful. And then the thing that I try and do as well, that I don't do as much of a great job of, is I actually try and disconnect
Mm.
you know, from the outside world. And by the outside world, I mean social media
Yeah,
and
good.
news, right? Like for me, if I spend too much time, like I want to spend enough time that I'm educated and I know what's happening around me
Mm-hmm.
and I'm internalizing those emotions to a certain degree. But if I'm in too much, like then now I'm just triggered all the time. You know
Right.
what I mean? Like I
Absolutely.
pay attention to like I just be triggered all the time. I'd be
Mm.
walking down the street, just getting mad at people for no reason, right?
Exactly.
Like just assuming that I know what this person's about, and now I'm mad at you for no reason. You
Yep.
know what I mean? Like I just always be triggered. And so like I try and distance myself from that a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
so that I don't overdo it. And so I'm not overly emotionally invested in things that are happening around me that I really can't control.
That's awesome. So what I'm hearing is you're definitely an advocate for protecting your peace. That's what that sounds like. That's a phrase I tend to use.
Well said. Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
taking that.
I'll have it. Protecting your peace. And I also heard boundaries. I mean, knowing when to say no, knowing that no is an okay answer. I tell people like no is a complete sentence all by itself.
Yep.
It communicates what it needs to communicate. And, some of us do have a problem saying no, or we feel like we do need to be the slave to the things around us, I think is how you phrased it. And really, I think it's more about building a condition to say no. I think
Yep.
it's a condition, right? We're conditioned to say yes to a lot of things because of the external stimuli that's coming in. It suggests that we should, right? And so
Yep.
sometimes that no is so necessary. And it
Or
takes some practice. Go ahead.
yeah, or no, or not yet, right?
Yep.
Like not yet is as good an answer as any, right? Like, and for some people, it's better than no. It's
This is
like,
true.
yeah, I will definitely do that. I'm just not going to do it right now, right? Like, well, I'm not going to be able to do it in this time frame, right? Like, to me, that's a perfectly acceptable answer to
Mm-hmm.
give to someone else in order to, set boundaries.
Yeah.
If it's something you really want to do for somebody, but you just can't do it in that moment without overloading yourself,
Mm-hmm.
then it's better off for all parties. I found in the long run, if you can be honest about what you can and can't do.
Oh, absolutely. I heard you say without overloading yourself, that phrase. And so, that's so key because so many of us on a daily, basis, particularly in the West, and I make these references just because I've had the opportunity now to live, Southeast Asia, and there's nothing West about it except the tourism spots.
Right.
Everything
Right.
else cut is very Thai and very East. And so, in terms of culture, and so our pace here is so much more aggressive than a lot of
Right.
places in the world, to be honest. We're just constantly go, 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 always, in an input output situation, and driving something to the next big thing. That's kind of just
Right.
always the pace. And, I love that you said, it allows you to set boundaries or the boundaries help you not overwhelm yourself. I think you
Right.
said something like that. And that's key. I mean, I was what, 30, I think 35, 34 when I first understood and began to learn about the concept of boundaries
Right.
and how healthy, how they are healthy ones, and no is okay. And you,
Right.
you can set very clear ones for people. And I think, it may come with practice for some folks because maybe
Yep.
it hasn't been something that they're used to. I mean, I was just in a conversation with someone the other day about a gentleman who, and we were talking relationships, and the thing is, this particular gentleman didn't have good boundaries, right? And in the way that he was coming off, with my friend, and I'm like, how old is he? And it was so interesting to just hear that, this guy's like around 50 and still just without these boundaries. Because
Yeah.
if you're not setting them for yourself, if you're not identifying what they,
Always with them. Yeah.
I always tell people, if you can't respect your own boundaries, I actually can't expect them to respect mine, right?
Right.
If they
Right.
haven't put any in place and they're bleeding off into everywhere else, then there's no way that they can actually adhere to what you expect or put out as boundaries. And so
Right.
I think as a result, though, sometimes there can be deeper conflict because of that, right?
Right.
That's when someone misinterprets your no as something much more personal, right?
Right. Yeah. I think so. A couple of things. One,
Mhm.
where I was introduced to boundaries was therapy. So like another, another point for therapy.
Right.
Um, but for me, like the way it was introduced was there's a sports saying, right? Like the best ability is availability,
Mm.
right? And in the sports context, it's really about people who get injured a lot, right? Like, so if I play a sport and I'm great, but
Mm.
I'm injured, then I'm not playing. So I'm not helpful. Like I can be Michael Jordan on the court, but if my legs always hurt or my back's hurt, like I'm not Michael Jordan, right? Like I'm not producing. So in that context, in life, if you're not available, then you're not able to accomplish the things you want to accomplish. And if you're not setting boundaries and you're getting overwhelmed,
Mm.
then eventually you're going to get injured. You're going to get, psychologically injured. And that takes a lot of forms. And you see it, it in terms of unhealthy eating and unhealthy living. And then, now you got diabetes or you got heart disease. Now you're not available, right? Like either at a professional level or for your family, or like strokes, heart attacks, all these things that afflict black people on a regular basis. Stress that is a killer in our community and leads to other things that I think that we don't necessarily put two and two together in terms of the effect stress has on us. Lack of sleep, all of these things are making you less available for whatever it is you want to be available for, whether that's your family or your job or your church or whatever, right? And so for me, I go back to, the best availability. The best ability is availability. In order to do that, I have to have these boundaries so that I can show up being my best self, wherever it is that I want to be my best self, whether that's in my marriage, my family, my work environment. And so for me, you have to do it. It's counterintuitive because you don't want to hurt people's feelings.
Mm.
But by the same token, like I'm doing you a favor by taking care of me, right? Like so that I can be a better me for you. And so you got to respect that. And if you can't, then, we got to change the dynamics of our relationship. That just is what it is. I think most people will get it, right? Like most people inherently understand, and those people who don't, you just got to do it anyway.
I love that. That was an excellent way to kind of wrap up everything for the day. Great points. Really appreciate your contribution. I'm gonna have more energy the next time. So what the audience doesn't know is I had to take a little bit of medicine before the show, and I'm like trying to push through it. So there's some transparency for narrative shifts. In case anybody's like, "What's wrong with her? Why is she like so?"
No, you're fantastic.
Well, thank you. You too. So I definitely appreciate you coming on. We'll definitely have to catch up again, maybe another time, another episode, another topic a little bit later. But I appreciate you just carving time out of your schedule. I know you're on Pacific time right now, so really appreciate you just kind of concluding your workday and then jumping right in here. Like such a blessing. So thank you so much.
No problem. I appreciate it. Thank you for having me. I mean, I admire the work that you're doing. This is like, these are important topics, right? Like for us to talk about as a community. So I love that this is what you're that this is what you're pulling together, that this is what you're doing, because it's needed and nobody else is doing it, right? Like, so I appreciate you, much respect.
Thank
Let me
you.
know how I can help. I'm happy to be there however I can be.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much, Bobby. All right. Thanks everybody for joining us. You'll catch either the rebroadcast